This is the matrix of creation. Literally encoded in this King's List, one of the most famous pieces of cuneiform on our planet that we have ever decoded, and the first three kings, the Holy Trinity, it's like they were cheat codes provided to you in advance to escape. What we're going to address today is the matrix of all creation that physicists talk about. Is there a matrix running behind everything that we would call reality? In Judaism, we see the 72 names of God. In ancient Egyptian, Osiris was dismembered into 72 pieces by God's lords of the underworld until he was reassembled. In Hinduism, there's a famous battle between 72 jinns in the Quran. There's 72 mentioned all the time. Most famously that I had ever heard was there's 72 virgins waiting for martyrs who died for the cause. In Buddhism, the largest Buddhist temple in the world has 72 of these bell-like structures outside of it called stupas. We're following a breadcrumb path of coincidence, and what could these coincidences be guiding us to? Why are there 360 degrees in a circle? Somebody had to have picked that at some point in our history, and I have hosted out at the Integratron these talks and lectures, and I've had mathematicians and architects and people that use geometry in their algorithms and their research all the time. And of course, everyone is familiar with a circle having 360 degrees, but to date, no one has known why there's 360 degrees. A circle is 360 degrees because of a math system called sexagesimal math. We are more comfortable with the idea of decimal math because that's base 10 math. Most of the world is now following base 10 math on the metric system. Base 10 math makes sense to us because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, and it's very easy to do math. We're thinking in terms of sixes or 60s. It doesn't seem so organic to us, but hopefully I'm going to show you that it actually is. But that's why a circle has 360 degrees, it is a function of 6 triangles with a 360 degree laid over it, and each one of those triangles at its core touching the middle is 60 degrees. So 60 becomes, and that's what sexagesimal means, is base 60 math. Why do we measure time by 60? So even though we have to go back in time to find out where a 360 degree circle came from, we are using a lot of sexagesimal math today in our everyday lives. So we measure time by 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour. If you go around the world and travel, you're very likely to find different measuring systems, meters and miles and kilometers. But if you're a boat captain or a plane pilot, the world is divided into nautical miles, and 1 degree nautical mile is 1/60th. 1 degree of latitude equals 60 nautical miles, or break it down into 6 nautical mile increments. So our whole planet, we're measuring time, and we're measuring our planet officially by functions of 60. Sacred geometry is described as a function of circles, but if you really look at it in these little flower petals, just pick one of these flower petals for yourself, and you will see, well, you won't know this, but that arc that makes that flower petal is exactly 60 degrees. That's really important to sacred geometry, is that you get that arc correct of 60 degrees of arc. Buckminster Fuller is called one of the greatest researchers and minds of the 20th century, and he said 60-degree math, and he even coined his own term, he called synergetics, reveals nature's behaviors both physically and metaphysically. And he went on to say, because society does not understand the significance of 60-degree geometry, we may conclude that society does not understand nature. I hope to guide you down a path where you are going to understand and recognize how significant 60 degree is, and so much of your life and your surroundings and the nature around you is based on 60-degree math. This is a form that Buckminster Fuller did not discover, but he did name the vector equilibrium. And he wrote 2 huge books about this shape alone, called Synergetics 1 and 2. And if you see that white center, it has 12 vectors radiating out of it. They're all exactly the same length, and they're all offset exactly the same from each other of 60 degrees. Buckminster Fuller came to believe that this is the matrix of creation, that this is the geometry. If physicists are right in telling us that our universe is geometric in nature somehow, Buckminster Fuller argued that this is that geometry, the vector equilibrium. So how did we get to the 60? How did humanity arrive at the 60? Well, that became a function of 12. If you take 12 and multiply it 5 times is how you get 60. And this is a counting system that's still taught in India and other parts of the world to school children, but rather counting just each individual finger, you use one hand and your thumb becomes a pointer, and you have the pads or the knuckles of your 4 long fingers. So you have on the left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You have 12 space holders on your long fingers of one hand. Once you reach that 12, you use your other hand, your right hand, to hold that position 5 times. So 12 times 1 is 12. And then when you get to 12 again on your left hand, you hold up your second finger. 12 plus 12 is 24. 24 plus 12 is 36. 36 plus 12 is 48. And 48 plus 12 is 60. Every 12 that you know of in your life, a dozen eggs, dozen donuts, 12 hours in a day, 12 saints, 12 disciples, 12 inches to a foot, came from this counting system. And all the 60s that we deal with on our daily basis, geometry of 360-degree circle, measuring time around us globally, measuring our planet the way scientists and boat captains and airplane pilots measure it, that 60 is all based on this counting system. So this becomes a major clue in our path of discovery. Where did this counting system come from? Well, we know. We know exactly where it came from and when. For most of the human story, life pre-6,000 years ago looked something like this: a hunter-gatherer existence. People were not farming, they were just going where there was food to eat. They had to go where there was fresh water to drink. They wore animal skins, they had very crude tools. Their shelter was very temporary and something they could transport. This is most life on the planet pre-6,000 years ago. But in one place, in one time on our planet, this showed up, a modern city. This is in Mesopotamia, in Sumeria, and you're looking at multi-story buildings. You're looking at the world's first pyramidal structure called the ziggurat, the world's first sailboat, the world's first written language, the world's first wheeled and axled vehicle, loom-to-weave fabric, pottery wheel, plow, arch, things we use today. And we're not talking about tweaking of technology. We're talking about the invention of technology, including the 1260 math system that we use today. Many books have been written about this moment in time in ancient Sumeria, saying civilization begins here. The modern human experience with written language, algebra, calculus, physics begins right here in this moment. And we can read their language. It's called cuneiform. There are libraries now that have cuneiform tablets. UCLA has roughly the equivalent of 12,000 of these small, like iPad tablets with this language that we broke the code of and can read. And we can read what they had to say. Where did you come up with all of this technology, language, and the math? They said, we did not. We were gifted this information by tall beings who came from the sky. Archaeologists want us to believe that these are just farmers celebrating the birth of agriculture, and they're carrying these little handbags. If you look at the far right guy or the far left guy, they're carrying these little pouches, and we have seen these tall, bearded beings holding these pouches at all these crazy sites around the world that confound us as how they were built, and yet we see these types of beings with these little bags. And our planet does some very specific things that would be observable from a distance. It has a spin rate, it's very specific. It has an orbit rate, 365 days a year. A day is one spin. 365 of those spins, creates an orbit, but our planet does one other thing. It wobbles. These are non-arbitrary things. These are mechanical things that our planet does. Spins at a certain rate, orbits at a certain rate, and wobbles at a certain rate. Well, that wobble is the biggest gear. Imagine all those things as gears. Our spin rate of a day is a very small gear. Our orbit circling around the sun is a larger gear. But the largest gear on our planet that it does is this wobble. It takes 25,920 years to complete one full wobble. And imagine like a top that is beginning to slow down, and instead of being perfectly straight up and down, it starts to wobble a bit. Now, this wobble is what created a thing called the precession of the equinox, and it's how we get our astrological ages. But that 25920 becomes a very significant number. So let's take that number, 25,920. That is a real non-arbitrary number, but now let's start using the Sky Visitor Sumerian math that was taught to us to count on our fingers. 25,920 divided by Sumerian math incredibly equals Sumerian geometry if the circle is 360 degrees. This slide right here is the one that has physicists and mathematicians and professors totally scratching their head, because now you're talking about something that, while you might still want to argue it as arbitrary, it starts leaning into non-arbitrary because of how well it cross-checks itself. So the non-arbitrary wobble divided by Sumerian math equals Sumerian geometry. The first one, 2160, that's the sum total of a cube. 25,920 divided by the second placeholder on your finger is 1080, an octagon. 25,920 divided by 36 is 720. That's the sum total of a hexagon. 25,920 divided by 48 is 540, the sum total of a pentagon. And then 25,920 divided by 60 is 432, the mysterious number that Joseph Campbell found all over the world in these mythologies and temples and religious teachings. There's other crazy things here. Where did the second come from? How did we get the formula for a second? Well, we take 12 hours of day times 60 seconds times 60 minutes. Look at the number that it produces, 432, with 2 zeros behind it. 12 hours of night and times 60 seconds times 60 minutes, again, 43,200 seconds of night. Total seconds in a day, that was gifted to us, that formula, by these Sumerians, 86,400. Well, if we use Sumerian miles, remember, not metrics, but miles, royal units, our sun's diameter in miles is a function of 864 with a bunch of zeros behind it, 864,000 miles across. Incredibly, our moon is exactly half of 432, 216 with 1 0 behind it. The moon's diameter in miles, Sumerian measuring system, is 2,160. This is where it gets really crazy. 432 times itself squared is 186,282 Sumerian miles per Sumerian seconds. The actual speed of light in miles per second is 186,624. That is a miscalculation rate almost unnoticeable, 0.001. If you square 431, you're nowhere in the neighborhood. If you square 433, you're nowhere in the neighborhood. You square 432, and you are virtually exactly the speed of light according to the measuring systems that were gifted to humanity by these so-called sky visitors 6,000 years ago. So the question we start asking ourselves is like, wow, here's a bunch of correlated information, coincidence off the chart. Is there a message that's trying to be conveyed? There absolutely is. We live in a harmonic universe. If geometry is the backbone of this energetic structure of our universe, and as we have found, the geometry reveals harmonics, then if we live in a geometric universe, we also live in a harmonic universe. And here's 3 harmonic triads that are perfect. They all go la, la, la. Most beautiful forms of music. In fact, you could almost think we have been programmed to recognize these tones played together as a clue that we're receiving information that is correct or makes us feel good. Let's look at nature. Let's look at the geometry of nature. Here's a shell. This pattern is called a Fibonacci spiral. this Fibonacci spiral is expressed all over the place in nature around us. It spins forward, it spins backwards, and then if it spins against itself, both forwards and backwards, you create a pattern called the pineal pattern. And pineal, the words pine cone and pineapple and pine tree, and you have a pineal gland in your brain, all has this exact pattern, and that is a Fibonacci spiral going one way against a Fibonacci spiral counter-rotating against it. It is virtually the architecture of most of life as we know of on this planet. Here's the same thing, spiral. Our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy is a Fibonacci spiral rather than very small, very large. So what if we took the mathematics of the Fibonacci spiral and applied frequency to those mathematic numbers? It would be very easy to do. Let's take the Fibonacci spiral that is all in nature, all the way out to galaxy size, and let's apply numbers to it. You start with a number. It doesn't matter what number you start with, but if you start here at you see the 144 down in the bottom right, that's just picking an arbitrary number. Like that's a signature frequency of a plant. And out of the moment that plant is birthed out of that right corner of that right hand 144, 0 plus 144 is 144 again. 144 plus 144 is 288. 144 plus 288 is 432. 288 plus 432 is 720, and on into infinity. Well, if we play those tones, those mathematical placeholders as frequencies, incredibly, we're right back to numerically perfect harmonics. So now we're really on the path of some incredible discovery about the essence, and is there a reason to believe there's a harmonic essence to life on our planet? Absolutely, because we take the first steps of growth of a Fibonacci spiral that launches everything from small spirals to big. The first 6 steps will reveal that exact same harmonically perfect triad. So here's a document written 6,000 years ago. It's the Sumerian Kings List. So this is written in cuneiform 6,000 years ago. It is writing about these kings, these rulers that lived in the region for tens of thousands of years each before a great flood consumed the planet. What I found interesting is the first 3 kings lived for 288, 360, and 432 with zeros behind it. Literally encoded in this King's List, one of the most famous pieces of cuneiform on our planet that we have ever decoded, and the first 3 kings, the Holy Trinity, is the same harmonic numbers. And it's a different chord. It's 288, 360, 432. But the same mathematically perfect intervals between them. This is another incredible moment of realization that we have been actually gifted in hard copies, not just in stories, but in hard copies that lasted for 6,000 years, codes and keys that will get us back to these numerically perfect harmonics. Let's look at these sky visitors on this mural. This is a mural that has been shaved off of a wall in Sumeria. But let's look at these, what archaeologists tell us are farmers, you know, with their little seed bags and standing by a plant, and that's the sun overhead. Up in the upper left of the slide, and the upper right, look at these 2 guys holding these pine cones, as archaeologists want us to believe. Well, 6,000 years ago, Sumeria was a desert then, as it is now. There was no pine cones, but let's look really close at what he's holding. He's not holding a pine cone. He's holding the same thing that's in the Vatican, right dead center in the middle of the Vatican, looks like a pine cone. We see this pine cone atop the twin snakes, the caduceus, activating a pine cone. So what is it? That pine cone is our pineal gland. They are holding that pineal gland actually up against the head of the humanoid form in front of them, as if this machine is somehow doing something to these pine cones. Again, giving us a very visual clue of what might be happening. So the supposition is all this information, what could it be leading us to? The tone set and this awareness of geometry might be activating our pineal gland that's inside of every brain. Every mammal has a pineal gland. And it could be the basis for instinct in some mammals. It could be the basis for migration in some animals. But in humans, philosophers from Rene Descartes to modern artists like Alex Gray, who painted this, would say, no, the pineal gland is our antenna that is receiving information from the universe as to who and what we really are. And we've either been ignored or it has been switched off. And we are in the process, these last 6,000 years, of trying to switch it on through the codes and the keys and the geometric riddles that were gifted to us. What happens when our pineal gland is activated? We become aware, we become conscious. And a symbol of consciousness in many cultures is the lotus flower. Another code or clue, perhaps, we've seen the lotus flower as a representation of awakening and enlightenment. Well, here's cymatics. Here's a scientific study of holding in a fluid, or you can even do it with loose grains of sand or powder, apply frequency to it, and you will get standing waveforms, and then you can take a picture of it and see this incredible geometry behind it. Well, I went to a cymatics lab, and I played the 3 tones of the Sumerian Kings list and the frequency tones of sacred geometry. We played both. Look what they revealed. That is a still shot of the patterning that came through when we played the 288, 360, 432. The researchers that had been doing research with cymatics for years had never seen something like this. It is like 3D. It looks like a lotus flower. You can see petals hiding behind other petals deeper you go. They're like, this is incredible. And no one has seen something like this in cymatics research before. So here's another coincidental reason to believe that all of this imagery showing pineal patterning or the lotus flower with these frequency sets that were gifted to us is actually doing something like activating our pineal gland and allowing us to see this lotus of awareness. My theory became that we might be living in a giant Earth-sized escape room. And if you're not familiar with what an escape room is, it's a form of entertainment. You go to a real location, you get locked into it with either yourself or a team, and clues are inside the escape room, but you don't even know what the clues are. You have to start researching things. So you'll see a clock, you see it says 4438. You might look for those numbers exposed somewhere else, but it's encoded with things that if you figure out all the clues and employ them correctly, solve the puzzles, you get to escape. It's like they were cheat codes provided to you in advance by the builders of the escape room to allow you to up level to the next level. And what I think we could be living in what many astrophysicists believe in, we're living in a holographic existence, and that we might have been getting numerical keys and codes and clues that will allow us to break through to the next level.